Wasp is the 20th MCU film that we've gotten since 2008. Holy crap, we are at 20 movies now. That's a lot! And to end off the MCU's 10-year anniversary, we have Ant-Man and the Wasp picking up a little bit after Civil War. Scott Lang has gone under house arrest to get out of the raft. He entered a plea deal, so he only has a couple more days until he can leave his home, visit his daughter outside of his house. And that's all he really wants to do. He just wants to be the caring dad for his daughter. But then all of a sudden, when he only has a few days left of his house arrest, Hope Van Dyne and Hank Pym show up and recruit him for some help with the quantum realm, because he went there at the end of the first Ant-Man. They think he may have a key part in helping them build the quantum tunnel and finding their long-lost mother and wife, Janet Van Dyne. And thus the adventure begins. I was really excited for this movie because the first Ant-Man I wasn't really that hyped for, but then I turned out to really like it. Like, I honestly still stand by the A- grade I gave it. I think that's a really good movie, really underappreciated in the MCU too. And 3 years later, we finally get the sequel. Peyton Reed is on board ever since day one. If you remember, in the first Ant-Man, Edgar Wright was directing for a bit. He had to step aside because he didn't like creatively where they were going, so they had to get Peyton Reed to fill in the rest. And I was very curious to see what they were going to do, because with that first Ant-Man, it did kind of feel like an Edgar Wright movie that was kind of being directed by someone else. There are just certain moments where you can definitely feel an Edgar Wright vibe. So I was very curious to see what Peyton Reed was going to do now that he was going to be on board with production from the beginning now, instead of just filling in for someone else. And I walked out of this film having a really good time. The stuff I really enjoyed from the last movie continued on for me to really enjoy in this film. For example, Paul Rudd as Scott Lang. He's still excellent as the character in my eyes. I've heard some complaints where people were saying that he's more of a bumbling idiot in this film compared to the first one, and I think that's a little unfair to critique, because in that first film, he was a little bit more in his element. He was planning a heist with Pym and Van Dyne, and because of his life of crime backstory, he was able to really fully succeed in that heist plot later on. It's just that whenever they talked about the science stuff, he didn't really understand much of what they were talking about. And the science is more elevated in this one, since they are talking a lot about the quantum realm. So to say that he's a bumbling idiot, I mean, yeah, but it's only because they're talking about a lot of stuff that he doesn't really understand at all. In that sense, he is continuing that underdog story where he doesn't really quite understand a lot of the logistics of what's going on, but he's still trying his best to prove that he is the hero that they need. So I thought Paul Rudd was exactly as good as he was in that first film. They still have that connection with his daughter, played by Abby Ryder-Fortson. They have a really sweet connection in this film. I think even a better relationship than maybe in the first film, since that first film was about them being apart and trying to get together, and in this one they do have more scenes where they are together, and I thought that was really sweet. They have this really sweet opening scene where Scott Lang has like built all these forts around his house and they're having an adventure, and it was like, oh, that's really sweet of them. Evangeline Lilly is also very good here. The Wasp suit is awesome. It can lead to some really fun action sequences, since she is now utilizing flying wings and blasters, and she is kind of technically more skilled fighting-wise than Paul Rudd as Ant-Man. So that leads to some very intense, really well choreographed action sequences that, in my opinion, are even better than a lot of the action scenes we got in that first Ant-Man. I'd say the train sequence with Thomas in the kid's room, that might still be the best action scene in the Ant-Man movies, but every action scene in this film I was completely blown away by, honestly. Like, they do a lot with the shrinking and growing. They utilize that skill very well. There's a lot of really fun, creative action sequences that are just so well planned out. The first action scene we see is so great, and then just continues to be great then on. It's what leads to having a really fun, really well-paced movie. Because this movie isn't over long or anything either. I can't really think of a dull moment in my eyes, because this movie just kept going at a really steady pace that had me on board. And I also really enjoyed the humor in this movie. Michael Pena comes back with the two characters, Dave and Kurt from the last one too, as Paul Rudd's criminal friends, and I thought they were still really good here, especially Michael Pena. I think he also had maybe a little bit more to do in this movie. They bring back the whole him telling stories bit again, and I still think that really works. It's very clear that that's an Edgar Wright kind of move. Like, you could tell that was all Edgar Wright's idea, but without Edgar Wright, they're still able to make that really work in this film. And also Michael Douglas as Hank Pym. I really do like him as this character, and I really liked him in this movie because he is trying desperately to get his wife back, get the mother of his daughter back, and I think him and Hope really had a really good emotional connection as to why they had to do what they had to do. But what continues to impress me about him is how well they de-age him CGI-wise. Like, holy crap. The visual effects look so good with these two. I don't know what it is about the Ant-Man movies specifically, but they really step up their game when it comes to de-aging mean, the Tarkin and Leia stuff from Rogue One didn't work for me, but then you look at this and it's like, this is actually very good. And I like what you're doing. It's kind of scary, though, how good this is getting. So the characters you like from the first one who come back are still really good here. The acting is still very strong. The comedy is still very good, in my opinion. And the action sequences may be even better than a lot of what happened in the first film. And the visual effects with the shrinking and growing and the CG ants, it looks all very good. Especially the de-aging. Jesus Christ, that's scary. And even when they start to explore the quantum realm, it is such a fascinating place visually to me. Like, it's just so well done and well designed. However, even though there are things I think they are doing better than the first film, I do think that in a couple places they mess up. For one, the antagonists of this film. There are 3 groups of people that are getting in the way of our heroes. One of them isn't really bad at all, which is the FBI, of course. They're checking on Scott Lang because he's under house arrest. One of them is played by Randall Park. He's kind of the lead guy. Jimmy Woo, I think, is the name of the character. And I understand why the FBI has to be in this movie. Scott Lang is under house arrest and he has to get off of house arrest, so the FBI keeps checking on him, make sure he's not breaking out and being Ant-Man. But it's just overall, I didn't really feel a lot of fear when it came to them. It just always felt like the heroes were on top of every action that the FBI could do. Randall Park has a few funny jokes, so that kind of makes the character more memorable and, you know, easier to watch. But overall, the FBI should have like this intimidating presence to them. Even though they aren't technically bad guys, they are still in the way of Scott Lang possibly getting off of house arrest. So there should be some kind of fear there, but it just always feels like whenever the FBI get involved, it's like, okay, we have a solution, we got it, don't need to worry about them. And that was a little disappointing. I think there could have been a lot of great tension when it came to that, and it just really wasn't here. Walton Goggins is an actor who I've really grown to appreciate recently. He plays the character Sonny Birch, who has a piece of tech that they need for the quantum realm tunnel, but through some circumstances, now Sonny Birch is after Ant-Man and the Wasp. And I know why the criminals have to be in this movie, because they need the really over-the-top hand-to-hand fights and the car chases that can require multiple broken limbs, and I can understand that. You don't want them doing that to the FBI because the FBI isn't necessarily the bad guys. You need actual criminals for that. So I can understand that. We wouldn't have the action sequences without them. But at the same time, you're going to get Walton Goggins to play this character, an actor who's clearly got much more to him. It just felt like a huge waste, honestly, getting him here, especially with the writing for the character. It really is just generic crime guy who doesn't really stand out in any way other than he's Walton Goggins, but Walton Goggins doesn't really make the character that much better. But it's not one of those subplots where you can just delete it off of the script, like, alright, it's gone, movie's much better. It's kind of entangled with some other plot points going on. You kind of do need them in this film, so what they could have done is just make them just a little bit stronger, make them a little bit more intimidating, but they just didn't. Whenever they showed up, it was just like, okay, it's Walton Goggins again, let's see what he has to do, and I didn't feel any tension for them either. Didn't feel any tension for the FBI, who is after Scott Lang, and I didn't feel any tension from Walton Goggins and his gang, who also is after Scott Lang, who are probably going to kill Scott Lang, whereas the FBI is just going to arrest him. There should be some tension for both of these groups, and it just isn't really there, and Walton Goggins doesn't really stand out. At least Randall Park has some humor, so his character's more memorable. Goggins doesn't really have that much to do. He is kind of just reacting to stuff going on around him. But now let's talk about the main antagonist of this film, Ghost. And it's played by the actress, I don't know the name, but she plays the character in Ready Player One who worked with Ben Mendelsohn, and she plays the main villain in this one. And the story for her, so much potential. So much. Like, it's right there. It was right there for them. And I will give them credit. They did a good job setting up a backstory with the character that can be seen as a personal kind of story. Like, not necessarily a bad person, just she's gonna do something bad to the main heroes by doing something that could help her out. And that's something I really liked about that idea, but it's so rushed. It feels so rushed in with the plot. Like, there's one exposition dump of a scene that just explains everything, lays everything out, and from then on, it just feels like, alright, you got the gist of that, you just feel sympathy for my character. And I wanted to feel sympathy for the Ghost terribly so, but after that exposition dump, like, it's a huge one. Like, they spend like a solid 5 minutes where the character's like, you want to know everything about me? Alright, sit down and relax, folks, I'm gonna talk to you about it now. And during that point and after it, it just felt like, if this was just written better, if you had just like slowly pieced this together, if you had just had more scenes before this, maybe this could have left to a good emotional impact, maybe this could create like such a memorable villain, but no, it's just, she's here and you get the basic of who she is and what she's doing, and she just doesn't really do that much else character-wise that's that memorable. She has cool phasing powers. I like the powers of the villain. It's not another shrinking person like Corey Stoll in the first Ant-Man, but still, the story was right there for them, and I think they really missed an opportunity to go all out and make this movie even more fantastic by working on this subplot. And there's even something else where she's working with a partner, and they have some mixed feelings on some things. And I was thinking, if you had fleshed this out more, if it was just more prominent, then this could have turned out really fantastic, and it could have elevated this movie to just more than a simple, really fun popcorn adventure. But instead, they rush through it, and it's like, oh, you're really getting rid of what could have made this movie even better than what I'm seeing right now. So as far as the antagonist writing goes, I think this movie really took a big step down. And this is coming from someone who didn't really love Yellow Jacket in the first Ant-Man, but at least there's only one villain, Yellow Jacket, in that one, and also it suffers the same problem as the Ghost. He's a guy who has a story that could be a really good personal touch. He feels betrayed by Hank Pym. As a mentor, he wanted so much more out of him, and now he's gone nuts because of the Pym particle that he's got from the Yellow Jacket suit. I think they really missed an opportunity with the Yellow Jacket character from that first film to make him more memorable, more personal, more of an emotional impact. It's the same thing that happens with the Ghost in this film. I think maybe the Ghost is a little bit better, but they're kind of on the same level almost for me. Like, it's almost exactly the same. So that's pretty much my big issue with this film, is that there's really no tension when it comes to the villains, and the one villain that could have really elevated this, like maybe a Killmonger in Black Panther, or an Ego in Volume 2, or Adrian Toomes in Spider-Man or Thanos or anything. Instead, they have a villain who's just another Yellow Jacket. It's there. It's not terribly bland like Malekith or Whiplash, but there's just so much potential that's untapped. And it just kind of creates this mood for the film that is a simple, really fun action-adventure film with some great visual effects, some great action sequences, and some really likable main character heroes. If you wanted something maybe a little bit more deep, like, not even Infinity War deep, but like Guardians Volume 2, that movie is actually considerably much deeper than maybe I even gave it credit for in my original review. Honestly, I bumped my grade from a B in that review to a B+. And like I said, this movie didn't need to go Infinity War levels of like dark or grim or anything, but I think some really deep themes that you could have gotten from these characters was completely missed just because they wanted to make a really fun movie. And sure, it's really fun, and I could watch it again. Like, I had a good time watching the movie, but I think they really missed an opportunity to make something more than that. I'm gonna give Ant-Man and the Wasp a B. Paul Rudd is still great as Ant-Man, Evangeline Lilly is great as the Wasp, finally great seeing her suit up and them working together. There's some really great fight choreography going on when both of them are fighting together. Michael Pena is still really funny, Hank Pym, Michael Douglas is still very strong here. The visual effects are great when it comes to shrinking and growing, de-aging, and the quantum realm look, but at the same time, the villain story is what's really dragging this down for me, and what's really hurting this film overall. Even though I did have a good time with it, and I definitely do want to watch it again, there's no denying that this is one of the MCU's weaker films in regards to the story. The first post-credit scene, though, stick around for that, because holy crap, that was amazing. Almost worth the price of admission alone just to see that first post-credit scene. No spoilers, but I cannot wait for next year. It's gonna rock. Don't stick around for the second one. You've seen it in the trailer, which was surprising to me. I thought the post-credit scenes were like secrets and you had to stay in the credits to actually see them. Like, you didn't have to see a trailer to see it, but whatever, I guess. Just don't stick around for that one. See the first one halfway through, and then you're good. If you wanted to know where Ant-Man is for like the rest of the Marvel movies that I've seen, I think it's definitely not as good as Infinity War, but I'd honestly give it a slight edge over Black Panther. Even though Black Panther has one of the best villains I've seen in a comic book film recently, I still think Ant-Man and the Wasp has it over humor and visual effects and action sequences. I think that's just enough to slip it slightly above Black Panther. The more I thought about Black Panther after I did that B+ review, the more I kind of wanted to lower it to a B. So it's not like I'm giving a B movie like a higher pass over when I gave it B+. I do want to lower that Black Panther grade to a B. Like, there's just another thing I thought about that would have lowered that grade for me. And I know that's blasphemous because Black Panther is a masterpiece to a lot of people, but I'm sorry. I just thought Ant-Man was just a slight bit better. If you want to see my entire MCU ranking, you can find my Letterboxd. I have a list there and you can see it. But if you've seen Ant-Man and the Wasp, leave in the comments below of what you thought of it. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.